As I began my first year at Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Atlanta, I was a bright-faced, energetic 23-year-old. I had grown up in a middle-class family where we didn't necessarily have lots of luxuries, but we were comfortable, and with planning and saving, we enjoyed the occasional indulgences. I had a good, stable upbringing, never wanting for the basic necessities of life, and I had just finished 4 years at a private liberal arts college. While certainly not isolated, I had lived a pretty sheltered life thus far. For MDiv students like myself, we were automatically enrolled in Candler's contextual education program. We served the first year in a social or a clinical setting, and the second year we interned at a church. So my first year, I was placed at an organization called Emmaus House. It's in Peoplestown, which is one of the poorest neighborhoods in downtown Atlanta. Emmaus House is an Episcopal-run community center that provides a wide variety of services to the residents of that area. I spent a year working in their poverty rights office, where my job was mostly to help people do the necessary paperwork to obtain an official state ID, a necessary element in applying for jobs or apartments, or getting your utilities turned on, or doing a whole other host of things that I had never even thought about. We also had sandwiches available for anyone who asked. We ran a clothing closet, and we gave vouchers and referrals to other organizations in the community. The population that we served was very impoverished and largely homeless. It is impossible for me to overstate the impact that that year had on my life. My sheltered world was blown open as I realized the extent to which systemic oppression of the poor and minorities operates in this country. There are exceptions, of course. There are people who rise out of extreme poverty and overcome the odds to make a comfortable life for themselves, but they are the exception. They're not the norm. Most people who are born into poverty stay in poverty their entire lives. They literally do not have the means to change their circumstances. I spent much of that year at Emmaus House thinking, this is not fair. It's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair. I painfully realized that where I was, a privileged, well-educated woman in graduate school, with a car, living in a decent apartment with my roommate, we had adequate food, I had good health insurance. All of this was simply because of my birth. And that was the hardest lesson of all. I would never end up in the situation that the people that I was serving were in, and it was simply because of the family that I was born into. If I lost my job, or I fell on hard times, or I had some catastrophic medical emergency, my family and friends had the means to assist me. I wouldn't end up homeless. I had a safety net under me that these folks never had and probably never would. And that broke my heart. Yes, I had worked hard, and yes, I was currently living off loans and a teeny tiny part-time job, but I was able to do all of that because of the family that I had been born into. I had been born to good parents who both had full-time jobs, which allowed us to live in a good neighborhood, in a good public school district where I got a good education and then went to a good college, etc. I was born into a level of privilege that others never reach in their entire lives. And what I was beginning to realize that year as I worked at Emmaus House is that with privilege comes responsibility. The I'm going to get mine and forget everybody else attitude that is so prevalent is the opposite of what God teaches us throughout the Old Testament. And it's the opposite of what Jesus teaches us in the New Testament. This morning we read in Micah, God has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? I'm sure that many of you are probably familiar with this verse. It's a popular one. It's often quoted and displayed. But there is a lot packed into this one little verse. It's beautiful, but it's not easy. And yet it is absolutely necessary for us to grasp. We are told that God has already told us what is good. We have the scriptures. We have the voice of the prophet crying out against injustice done to the poor and the foreigner. We have the laws of God spelled out for us. The role of a prophet in the Old Testament is to call the people to account. The prophets are called on by God to point out places where the people have turned aside from God's law, where they are abusing their position as the people of God. The prophets tell the people that they have erred, and that if they don't repent and return to God, God will punish them. As fallible human beings, we easily and often turn away from God. We revel in our own wealth, in what's going on in our own lives, not caring for the poor, the alien, the stranger among us. We turn other things, ideals, politics, leaders, money, specific issues, into idols, believing that these can somehow save us. We forget God's law in favor of laws that are easier, less sacrificial, and more in line with secular society. And it's the prophet's job, then and now, to call us to account. God has told us what is good. And unlike Micah's original audience, we also have the teachings and the living example of Jesus Christ to draw on as well. We heard Jesus recite today what's known as the Beatitudes. We are told that blessed are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, and those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. From this list, we can see some of what Jesus considers good, and also some of those whom he considers disenfranchised. It's not an exhaustive list, of course, but it's a start. And when we read it alongside his teachings and miracles and actions throughout the rest of the gospel, we get a full picture. God has told us what is good. The verse in Micah has two parts to it. The first part is what we've just gone over. The second part of the verse is a question. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? These three imperatives, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God, is what we are called to do. These are a summary of the good that God has told us. Do justice. Do it. Don't just claim to believe it or give it mouth service. Do justice. This is an active command. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice? This means standing up for the oppressed. It means calling to account those who have harmed others. It means fighting against corrupt systems that intentionally disenfranchise whole groups of people. In our days, it can also mean going to rallies or marches. It can mean contacting our congressional representatives when bills are being presented that are contrary to God's law and our belief. It means volunteering and supporting organizations that work for the oppressed in all forms. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness? This clause is often translated love mercy, and mercy and kindness go hand in hand. What does the Lord require of you but to love kindness? To love kindness means to celebrate the good in the world, celebrate the good works that people do for one another, celebrate the love and generosity between people, celebrate acts of kindness and mercy. But we aren't just to celebrate the kindness around us, we are to love kindness, which again, like do justice, is a call to action. To love something or someone means a lot more than just an emotion. It means actively taking the other into account, working for their best interest, and often sacrificing something of ourselves to help another. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? We're not meant to just go through the motions of our faith, to show up on Sunday morning, do our thing, and then leave and not think about God again until next Sunday. We are meant to walk humbly with our God, day in and day out. We are meant to have a relationship with God. To walk with God implies a relationship. It implies that we are moving forward in our faith, side by side with God. Walking with someone is often accompanied by talking with them. We walk and we talk, and in doing so, we build relationship. But we don't walk in arrogance. We walk in humility with God. We recognize that though we are in relationship with God, we are not the ones in charge. God is God. We are not. We are called to be agents of God on earth, much like the prophets of old. We are called to be the hands and the feet and the voice of God, but the only way that we can do this is through humility. God is ever active in the world. It is our job to humbly listen, to figure out what God is calling us to at this particular point in history. Understanding what is good, doing justice, and loving kindness all come out of this final imperative to walk humbly with God. This is our starting point, not the end. Over the last few months and weeks, I've thought a lot about the people at Emmaus House, the people on the fringes of society. I've thought about my own privilege and where that privilege comes from. Part of it is privilege that I was born into, but part of it is also privilege afforded to me by those who have come before me, working tirelessly to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with their God. I am humbled by the realization that I am where I am, standing here before you, because of the tireless efforts of women and men whom I will never know and whose stories I will likely never hear. And that's okay, because they saw a big picture and they were willing to work for it. I'm humbled because I realize that I am not doing nearly enough to fight for the oppressed today. There is a lot of injustice in this world, in our country, and in our own community. Now is our time to do what we can to make a difference. Now is our time to stand up for the oppressed, to be those who not only work for justice today, but who, in doing so, also work for future generations. God has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? May we all humbly listen as we walk with God. Listen for what justice and kindness God is calling us to work for today.